everybody, my name is Olivia and I'm 18 years old. Tell me, have you ever dreamed about one day meeting your twin brother you had not known about? Or a twin sister? Do you think things like that don't happen in real life? Don't jump to conclusions so quickly. My story, although it seems incredible, proves that miracles do happen. Subscribe to the channel because I know what will really surprise you. I live with my adopted parents. They took me in 10 years ago. Before that, I'd lived my whole life in an orphanage, and so I don't remember my real mom and dad at all. They must have abandoned me when I was very young. It happens, and I hold no grudge against them. My new parents became my real family. This story began the day I suddenly got a stomachache. The pain was so bad that my mother called an ambulance. They took me to the hospital, examined me, and told me that I needed a surgery immediately. It wasn't anything too bad, just an appendicitis. The operation was not complicated, but it couldn't wait. I went under anesthesia and everything grew dark. I came to in a ward after the operation had been completed. I felt a little sick and moaned. Suddenly, I felt someone take my hand. It felt really great that someone was there for me. I decided to see who it was and turned my head to look. A girl was lying on the bed next to mine. But what was it? I couldn't believe it. We had the same eyes, the same hair, the same smile. That girl was a copy of me. She was looking at me, surprised and smiling. She probably couldn't believe it either. I wanted to ask her why she looked so much like me, but I couldn't. The girl had an oxygen mask on her face, and so she wouldn't have been able to answer me anyway. But I didn't need an answer. I knew who she was. My twin sister, Isabel. I hadn't seen her in 10 years. We had lived at the same orphanage together. We'd always looked exactly alike. She had been my closest friend, and we'd shared all our joys and sorrows. We had always been there for each other, but after I'd been adopted, my sister had been left alone in the orphanage. We had been separated. I hadn't seen her since. But I'd often thought of her, and I'd always known we would meet again someday. But our reunion was short-lived. That very day, I was moved to another ward. I asked them to let me stay with Isabel, but they told me that we had different diagnoses, so I had to be transferred to another ward. Isabel had got in a car accident and had to spend more time in the ward for seriously ill patients. A few days after that, I was released from the hospital and went home. I hadn't got to see Isabel again, but I couldn't stop thinking about our meeting. I found it strange that we had been separated as children, so I immediately asked my adopted mother about it. She looked very surprised and said, "What are you talking about, Olivia? There had been no Isabel at the orphanage. Maybe Mom had forgotten?" I reminded her that my sister Isabel had been there for me. We looked very similar, but they had chosen me. Why hadn't my parents taken both of us in? "Sweetie, are you feeling all right?" my mother asked anxiously. "You never had a sister. You had been alone there." I couldn't believe it. Why was my mother lying to me? I remembered everything perfectly. I realized that my adopted parents were hiding the truth from me. But why? That's when I decided to find Isabel. As soon as I was able to walk after the operation again, I immediately went back to the hospital. I said I'd come to visit my sister at the reception. I didn't know what her last name was now, but I told them that her first name was Isabel and that she had been admitted after a car accident. Strangely enough, they told me they had not treated any girl fitting that description. How could it be? I told them she looked just like me. That's when they realized who I was talking about. However, they said her name was Hannah, and she'd already been discharged. Hannah? How so? Had my sister changed her first as well as her last name? But why? I asked them for her address, but they said they were only allowed to give me her phone number. In the evening, I called the number they had given me at the hospital. When she answered, I felt that our voices sounded a lot alike. It was her, my sister. I explained to her who I was and cried from joy. "I finally found you," I said through my tears. Isabel, or as she was called now, Hannah, said that she was very glad to hear from me, but unfortunately, she didn't remember me. Hannah said that she had amnesia after the accident, and everything that happened before the hospital had disappeared from her memory. "Then I have a lot to tell you about. Let's meet up," I said cheerfully. Hannah agreed, of course. We met the next day, and I immediately hugged my sister. Hannah was, of course, quite taken aback. After all, she didn't remember me, and so I was a complete stranger to her at that moment. But I started telling her about our childhood at the orphanage and how close we used to be. "Can't you see how similar we look? That's because we're sisters," I said cheerfully. Since then, my sister and I saw each other a lot. Of course, we were family, but 10 years had passed and each of us had different parents now. She couldn't just move in with me or I with her. I hadn't told my adopted parents anything yet. I still didn't understand why they were lying to me by not admitting that I had a sister. But Hannah told her parents about me and they wanted to meet me. So one night, I went to their house for dinner. When Hannah's mom and dad saw me, they were very surprised, of course. I've heard that everyone in the world has a double somewhere, but to see it with my own eyes, unbelievable, Hannah's mom said. I said that it was not surprising since we were twin sisters, but Hannah's parents laughed all of a sudden and said I was wrong. Hannah didn't have a sister and never had. Moreover, they claimed that they were my sister's biological parents and had never adopted her. It was simply impossible. That's when I realized that Hannah's parents were hiding something as well. They were lying to the both of us. But what was going on? Why were they keeping the truth from us? And then I realized how to get to the bottom of it all. The following day, we met up with my twin, went to a clinic, and did a DNA test to prove we were related. Hannah agreed that it was a good decision, and I was very happy that she was so supportive. We took the test and were told the results would be ready in a few days. We spent the whole time impatiently waiting for the confirmation that we were sisters. And then someone would have some explaining to do, our parents, who didn't want to tell us the truth. I went to see Hannah every day and we talked a lot. I felt supported and cared for by my sister once again and tried to always be there for her as well. One day I was telling her about our childhood she did not remember once again. Hannah was so engrossed in my story about our escapades at the orphanage that it gave me a good idea. Let's visit the place where we grew up. Maybe it will bring back your memory, I suggested. Hannah agreed and we headed to the orphanage. It hadn't changed at all in 10 years. I hadn't been there. It looked the same as it had the day I left, only the children were different. We met the head of the orphanage, Mr. Williams. He didn't even recognize me at the beginning. But when I told him who I was, he smiled and said, "Olivia, it can't be. Look how you've grown." I showed him Hannah and asked if he'd remember my sister. I told him she used to be called Isabel, and we had grown up together in that orphanage. But suddenly the smile disappeared from his face. He looked at me anxiously and said we should talk in his office. Only me and him. I felt a little scared. What did Mr. Williams want to tell me about? But I went with him after all. In the office, he sat me down in front of his desk and told me I was wrong. I never had a real sister. What do you mean never had a sister? I remember her very well. You even took pictures of us together, I told him surprised. Yes, here are those photos. See for yourself, said Mr. Williams and handed me the photos. I saw myself as a child, but there was no one next to me. How could it be? But I remembered her so clearly. And then he told me my story. My parents were very troubled people. When I had been born, they hadn't taken care of me at all. I had been often left all alone. Nobody had paid me any attention. That's why I made up my twin sister Isabel, to have someone to talk to have a sister that would take care of me. My imaginary twin and I had been brought to the orphanage, and when I had been adopted and my parents had begun to take care of me, my sister had gradually disappeared from my mind. I listened to Mr. Williams and started to remember. Pieces of my childhood memories fit into a puzzle. The head of the orphanage was right. How could I have got it so wrong? But who was Hannah then? Just a girl that looked similar to me? Had I really met my double? How was I going to tell her everything now? I walked out of the office and immediately bumped into Hannah. She looked at me with frightened eyes and held out her phone. The DNA test came in, she said. We aren't related. I already knew that. There were tears in Hannah's eyes. She turned and ran away. I didn't stop her. I left the orphanage and started walking down the street. I was so lost in my own thoughts I didn't see anything around me. I couldn't believe what had happened, but even more than that, I felt hurt. I just found my only family member and lost her immediately afterwards. I was so lost in my thoughts I did not notice a red light and went out into the roadway. A car was coming straight at me. I heard the screech of the brakes and then a thud. Then it was dark. I came to in a hospital. I was lying on the same bed Hannah used to lie on. My adoptive mom and dad were sitting next to me. They looked very scared. My mother told me that I had been hit by a car, but the danger had passed and I would soon recover. I felt very sorry for having worried them and ashamed that I had doubted them. I asked them to forgive me and thanked them for caring for me. Now I know that I don't have a sister, I said sadly. What do you mean you don't? Smiled my mom. What about Hannah? The door of the room opened and she came in. My sister. She sat down next to me and said, I'm sorry I ran away. I needed some time to think. Although we're not related, we are sisters in spirit and will always be together. I won't leave you. I started crying with joy, and my parents left to give us some time alone. That's how I found my twin sister. We are always together these days, and I'm glad that everything happened like that. What do you think? Can a complete stranger become closer than a relative? Write in the comments down below.